Hey everybody, so I want to give a little bit of an introduction to this video, which is the on-site live filming. The first two generations, Johann Adam Walborn, they believe he died around 1741, probably around, they had a settlement somewhere near the Swatara Creek. So where that exactly would have been, I honestly don't know. Um, I got to do more research on that. The second generation, Christian Wilhelm Walborn, who's the one that built the plantation there in Myerstown, bought 176 acres from Caspar Wister, who we've talked about several different places already. He was a major merchant in Philadelphia, and then joined the Quaker faith because he saw that that was a way politically to be able to move up, and ultimately decided land was where the money was to be made, and he was quite right about that. Um, so Christian bought 176 acres from Caspar Wister, then went to Henry Bassler, who had one of the other plantations uh, over on Race Street, going towards the Bear plant, the western part of the Bear plant. You have Race Street going through there, and that house, the Bassler Mansion, that is not the original mansion, and I do not believe the Walborn Mansion that stands there currently. These were neither of those were the original structures. Those got built a little later, maybe about the 1780s, but those are the original plantations. The cool thing about the Bassler Mansion is right there where Race Street goes over the top of Hawken. It is actually built sitting on top of a Union Canal lock. There's another one, I think it's Long Drive, that's out near Ebenezer, where the road goes over the bridges sitting on one of the old Union Canal locks. It's actually a pretty neat thing to stop and see. Just if you do stop there, just be careful because there's not really a major parking area there, and people do have a tendency to drive through there a little nuts. But it is sort of cool to be able to stop, look over, and see on either side the original one of the original Union Canal locks from the second Union Canal, because the first one had three canal locks built on the top of Hawken Manor, which was the fourth plantation. Isaac Meyer Homestead was the first. They The Lay family owned that, and they were very close to George Washington. George Washington was a big proponent of the Union Canal. He saw the benefit of having a canal go from the middle reaches of Pennsylvania, where all the farming was, and bring all that to like Philadelphia, and then that could go to New York City and Boston and the big cities. Uh, so they built the first three, ran out of money. They were built of brick. And ultimately, those bricks would be taken when the Union Canal ran out of money, and those bricks would be used when they started building the second Union Canal. They actually went south of that original section that they had done, and then they took those bricks and they actually made on Maple and 72 South in the corner there. There's a yellow brick house. Those are the bricks from the original three locks, and that became the Union Canal headquarters. I guess the guy that was the manager of the whole thing lived there, and their pay office and all that kind of stuff. Because right near there would have been, they had in essence, I guess you could say docks. It has a different name for it, but over winter you could park your canal boats there, and it was sort of as it was like docks almost that you could unload for Lebanon and that type of stuff. But Christian Wilhelm Walborn's the one that built that. He was also the lay minister for Christ Evangelical Lutheran Church. Another thing of note that I promised from the video yesterday, uh, Richard Wheeler is the author that I'm thinking of, because the Lay family, one of the sons of Michael Lay, I believe it was, went to Pine Grove. He had a home built. It was called Nutting Hall. This writer, Richard Wheeler, his sister lived there, and he lived the last 12 years of his life. And we've filmed a long form video for Richard Wheeler showing some of his books, some of them that he actually signed for my dad. My dad is one of my dad's favorite writers. And they actually have a placard there that talks about Richard Wheeler. And he actually dealt with as well. Clint Eastwood did a film on Iwo Jima. It based loosely off of the book that Richard Wheeler wrote, and then he was there as an advisor. Uh, but anyways, also another thing that I brought up is to talk about Johann Adam Walborn. He was originally a day laborer on his like Igiosis Storiosis sound very Roman. He was originally a day laborer, but then he became a Hoffman. Now, I'd never heard of that term before. Obviously, the last name I've heard the surname, but those surnames are usually based, like I'm Miller, so I would have been, my family back in the day would have somehow been involved with a mill, something of that nature, doing the milling process. Hoffman is actually another word for steward. So he worked his way up from a day laborer to about 8 years later, he was a steward of this guy's estate, which is really saying something. So they came from some money then. I mean, he wasn't rich by any means, but they could have afforded a trip over, but they were very close to the Bator family. So they sort of went along with those people, and their lot was combined. And then when they went to New York City, that's where Christian Wilhelm Walborn married Katerina, I believe her name was, Batdorf. He married her in New York City. Somewhere along that voyage, Johann, Adam's wife, probably on the voyage died, because there was 3,000 people on the voyage on 10 ships, and it was horrible conditions, and a lot of people died, and they don't mention her after they land in New York City. Even before, they don't mention her. So I'm assuming she was buried at sea. They don't mention her when they went into the New York colony, the Schoharie Valley, where they had Livingstonville first, and then went over to that Annville in the actual Schoharie Valley, and then just basically said, we've had enough, when they took their land. Whether it was right or wrong, I don't know. But when they came down, they had some means, because they were able to buy property. And you had to have some coinage and some funds to be able to do that. So they were able to do that in some way whatsoever. But the interesting notes there is that they were probably very familiar with Conrad Weiser, very familiar with the Muhlenberg family, very familiar with Johann, it would have been, was it Johann Caspar Stover, John Caspar Stover? So it would have been Johann, but he had switched over to the anglicized version of John, from Johann to John Caspar Stover, who was the father of the American Lutheran Church, along with it was some Peter. I think it was Peter Melchior, I believe is how. And because they had they were like Albus Dumbledore. They had like Albus something Brian Dumbledore, like 4 different names. They were sort of the same. He had 2 famous sons. One was a famous politician down, I believe, in Virginia. They were both, the sons were ministers. But the son that was here in Pennsylvania, he would become the first and fourth Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives. He also preached at a number of different churches that we visited, like St. Luke's in Schaefferstown, their Salem Evangelical Lutheran Church in Lebanon, which is one of the first places that the Declaration of Independence was read. So they knew some very important people, and they were close with Washington apparently, which is really, really cool to learn that about your ancestors. But I think that covers everything that I wanted to talk about that I would be in this video that I mentioned in the previous video that I need to clarify a few things. So I hope you guys enjoy this. We start out at Christ Lutheran Church in Stouchsburg. This is where Martin Walborn, the 3rd generation, or Martinus Walborn, was buried. He would want, I think he was the 7th son seventh child out of 12 children. But for some reason, Christian had him as the guy that was executor of the estate, along with his one son-in-law. And Martin wound up being given in the will the 176 acres of the original plantation, and then the rest of the acreage was split up amongst the remaining children, and then he had to pay either a total amount of £500 to everybody, or 500 per each living child, and then a certain amount to the 2 grandchildren from the one sister. I don't know which it was. I just, from reading the will and last will and testament of Christian Wilhelm. So then we go from Christ Evangelical Lutheran Church. We actually go over to the placard for the Revolutionary War vets to just check out Martin Walborn's name on that. Then we go down to Myerstown, and we go to the Union Cemetery where Christian Walborn, the 4th generation of the Walborn family here in the New World, is buried. And he also served in the Revolutionary War. Martin had served notoriously, like I say in the video, several different battles, very important battles, and most of all, crossing the Delaware with Washington. Martin was also married to one of the Lay sisters, so he was very familiar with the Lay family and would have known. They were close staff of Washington, so he would have known them rather well. And then at last, we'll go past that Christian Wilhelm Walborn, where the plantation would have been, and where the beautiful stone house with the white pillars is. I do not believe, from what, because I had read something about it stood till 1971. It was sort of still standing in 1971, which you would assume when they say still standing in 1971 and they don't say anything else about it, sort of makes me think that it probably didn't last a whole lot longer than that. I would assume it was a stone structure because all of the other ones would have been stone. They had the means to be able to afford it. So this was a cool family. And then we will pick up the next video for the Walborn family will be over in Millersburg when I get the opportunity to go over there, because Christian Walborn's son, the 5th generation of Walborns here in the New World, his name was also Christian. And I got to do a little more research because I think his son was Christian. So there were 3 Christian Walborns in a row, and then it was Daniel Walborn. And somewhere in that next section of Walborns, I will show you the family Bible. And to answer Jay's had said something on there, I do not believe the family Bible that I have from the Walborns is from when they were making that winter trip in this first video, or the first video yesterday talking about their journey. This, I think, came around 1810 to 1820, but it is in German, and it has all the writing in there, the different members of the family after that. I believe, I was looking at Ancestry, I believe Christian or Martin is my 5th great-grandfather. So, you know, that's how many generations removed on the Walborn side I am from the American Revolution. It's a pretty cool thing to find out. So I hope you guys enjoy this video and explore with me these family members and a little bit more of the Walborn family history. As always, I want to say thank you and enjoy the video. Hey everybody, so we're tracking some family history for Finding History, and my Walborn side of the family, I've been able to track back to the first member of the Walborn family, a Christian, I think it was Christian Wilhelm Walborn. And they came here, I believe it was, I'll have more information, the exact dates, but they came here through to New York City, and he wound up marrying, they went up into, because they had to pay off their debts, they were part of that Huguenot, Queen Anne would provide a way for them to be able to come to the New World, and they took advantage of that, came here through New York City, wound up going up to another area in New York to pay off their debts. Basically were in essence indentured servants, and then they went over to the Scullerney Valley, served there a little bit more, and eventually, along with another, I think it was like 30 total families, just basically decided they had had enough, and they came south along the Susquehanna River and eventually settled in this region here. They actually, the Christian Walborn bought, I think it was 176 acres from Caspar Wister. We talked about him quite a bit. And he would make a plantation. He'd also buy, the Bassler family they were the big time merchants in Myerstown region, which would have been Tulpehocken at that stage. So he wound up buying a bunch of land from him as well. And there's actually, the stone house still stands today on the western side of Myerstown, has really beautiful pillars on it and like that, and that's where they had their family and had a plantation there. Now the church behind us is Christ Evangelical Lutheran Church. This church was built, I believe this particular building was built in 1786. Had add-ons and things like that, but the original church, the log structure, was built in, I believe, 1743. They had originally belonged to a church that was sort of, it was Moravian, Reformed, and Lutheran, and the Moravians sort of took over the church, which a bunch of people were unsatisfied with, and they ultimately decided to create their own church here, called it Christ Church. The first pastor was a Tobias Wagner from 43 to 49, I think, in the 1700s. But a lay minister he was known as Reverend Christian Walborn. He actually was one of the ministers here that ministered to the congregation and would go around to different congregations in the area. But the person's grave that we are visiting here, Christian Walborn, is supposed to be buried here, but there are a lot of really open areas of cemetery. So somewhere within here, like the Walborn family baptismal records and other records are all within the church. So they clearly went here, clearly were probably buried here as well. He married into the Batdorf family, which is a very famous family. And they're probably both buried here, but there's no stones that can be found because there's a lot of really open areas here. But his son, Martinus, or Martin Walborn, is actually buried here. Martin Walborn is interesting, and his son, Christian Walborn, which we'll be going down to the Union Cemetery to visit his grave down in Myerstown, Pennsylvania. They both served in the Revolutionary War. So let's flip this around. As you guys can see, there are a lot of empty sections. These are sections, there are people buried here. It's just the stones no longer exist or placed up against the walls. Good chance that some of them could have been just field stones, that type of stuff. But this whole area here, this is all Walborns. I believe this is his wife, Martin is his wife. She was actually from the Lay family. They were very famous. They served with George Washington. There's several different spellings, L-E-I and L-E-Y, which was later anglicized versions. One of the sons wound up building Nutting Hall in Pine Grove, which is a really famous house where the famous writer, whose name evades me right now, we've talked about, we've done a couple different videos. His sister lived there. He wound up living, I think, the last 12 years of his life there, and we'll talk about that. I'll get that name to you. That's his brother John Walborn, who also served in the Revolutionary War. He was about 3 years younger than Martin, but this is all Walborn family right here. And the last stone, which unfortunately has fallen over, it was cracked before, so I'll have to see about trying to, when I start knowing more what I'm doing, trying to get this stone back and erect so it doesn't wear out any further. Also potentially start cleaning the Walborn family ones here as well. Martin Walborn was actually a really interesting figure because he served with General Washington starting in the Battle of Long Island. He would eventually serve when they crossed the Delaware River. The famous painting that they have, Washington and the crossing of the Delaware. He actually was one of the guys that went with Walborn, or went with General Washington. So he would have actually known General Washington, which is pretty darn cool to have that in your family history. There is somewhere on this property, there's supposed to be a Revolutionary Bicentennial plaque that has his name on it. It has it as Martin Walborn, which would have been his anglicized version of his name. But he actually fought Princeton, a number of other battles, Monmouth, through the entire Revolutionary War. And as far as I know, he was only a private, but his son, Christian Walborn, he actually was a higher rank. He only started serving, though, in 1782, I believe, and that's probably John, his brother. He served a Revolutionary War, so what his rank was, I'll have to look more of that stuff up and add that into the information that I have for you guys. I'm going to try to find this military plaque. I remember seeing it at some point, but I just can't remember where. I think it might be over in a new cemetery. I always sort of thought it was on the wall here, but I don't see it. Maybe it got removed for cleaning or something of that nature. But this is first of my Walborn side. It's the one part of the family. My dad's a Miller. His mom was a Brown. My mom's dad was the Walborn. That's the side of the family that I tracked the whole way back to 1666. And then her mother's family was the Copenhavers, which weirdly, the Christian Walborn that we're going to visit, he actually married a Copenhaver lady. So they actually married into that family several times, which is not surprising considering it really was a much smaller world back then. But really stunning stones here. I'm going to quick show you. I did a short, but some of these old stones that they have here with the German iconography, they all mean a little something and are unique in different ways, but they're just really pretty slightly sort of freaky stones. Skull and crossbones with the angel wings. And also Regina Leininger, in legend, was Regina Hartman. She was a captive during the French and Indian War period. And she would get returned, and they have part of the legend is how she recognized her mother as her mother sung a German hymn. This one I think is phenomenal. It's got like the angel there and everything. But this, as you go over into Berks County, this is where you'll start seeing these older sandstone stones. But this is such a, I mean, you see this huge open area. This is burial. Like, I think the original church would have been like right in this corner here somewhere, but really is stunning place. So let's go and see if we can find that plaque. So here it is, the bicentennial commemoration of the soldiers and patriots of the Revolutionary War. They were Johannes Ansbach, John Peter Ansbach, Franz S. Brosman, Peter Broa, Peter Etchberger, George Gessimer, George Graf, Andreas Graf, Johannes Katterman, Christian Lauer, Christian Leshner, Jacob Livingood, Peter Stein, John Walborn, Martin Walborn, and Jacob Weiser. Just sort of wonder if Jacob Weiser was related to Conrad Weiser. Probably a good chance. I actually saw another grave over here. It's a Walborn. Obviously it would have been much later descendants of one of the other Walborns. It's just sort of Ella Cap Walborn and Franklin M. Walborn. But you just think about how many of the people, Walborn families, came from Christian Walborn. Really is one of those things that's sort of exciting to me, because it's like, how many of those other Walborns are we all descended from him? And that history starts here at Christ Evangelical Lutheran Church, which I think one of the things I'm going to show as well, just because I think it's pretty neat. They actually have a thing here for the first pastors, or the pastors of the church. I was looking for Christian Walborn, because they talk about him being a reverend and being referred to as such. And they talk about him being a lay minister, which I have to look up exactly what that means, but I guess it's just somebody that would serve in times of when the other pastor wasn't here, because a lot of times back in those days, you know, if you were a denominational pastor or minister, you would actually serve several churches. So the earliest church would wind out getting up, they'd be having their service at 7 a.m. Then he'd have his service, he'd go to the next church, they'd be at 9 or 10. The next one would be, say, midnight, or noon, and then so on. And maybe they'd hit 3 or 4 or 5 churches. There's Christ Evangelical Lutheran Church, Stouchsburg, PA. Erected the first church in 1743. This building is second church, which is this building. 1786, remodeling of second church. 1885, and then rebuilding of it. So maybe this was actually rebuilt 1888. I think there was something, they had some kind of, it wasn't a fire, some kind of other thing, and they rebuilt it. But you have the first pastor was Tobias Wagner. He was 1743 to 1746. Johann Kurtz, 1748 to 1770. And then the really famous one was Christopher Schultz. He was actually the father of John Andrew Schultz. Christopher Schultz was married to one of the Muhlenberg daughters. So John Andrew Schultz would wind up becoming part of that famous Muhlenberg political dynasty. His uncle, I think John Peter, was actually the first and fourth U.S. House of Representatives Speaker of the House. So a very famous family. Their father, which I'm not even going to try to pronounce his name, he was actually considered one of the founding fathers of the Lutheran Church. So the sons sort of followed in his footsteps, continued to be pastors. His sister wound up marrying a pastor, Christopher Schultz. And this was a huge, like they had a mill and everything here. It was a really big enterprise here. And then John Andrew Schultz would follow in his father's footsteps, and he would become a pastor and eventually starting the Friedens Lutheran Church down in Myerstown, Pennsylvania, where we're going next to the Union Cemetery. And we'll see you down there. Here we are in the Union Cemetery of what would have been Friedens Lutheran Church, which would have sat right over here on the corner, and then the Reformed Church. I think it was a German Reformed Church referred to back then. They were both offshoots. The Reformed Church would have been an offshoot of Tulpehocken Evangelical Reformed, and the Friedens Lutheran would have been an offshoot of the Christ Evangelical Lutheran Church, which we had just visited. And that was started by John Andrew Schultz, who eventually would come on to become the governor of Pennsylvania. He also served as a Pennsylvania representative. I believe he was governor from 1823 to 1829. Also on the Martin Walborn, he also served in the Battle of Brandywine. And right here is his son, Christian Walborn, and his wife, Catherine. So let's turn this around. Sort of hard to read these here, and I actually have the war thing in front of hers, which is wrong, but this is Christian Walborn, and then, like I said, his wife, Katharina Walborn, I believe it is. And we have another Walborn over here. This might actually all be Walborns. These might be some of their children. But there are another couple of Walborns over there. I believe it's a Leonard Walborn. I don't believe he served in the Revolution, but he might have. He would have been another brother of Martin and John Walborn, who both served in the Revolutionary War, so he most likely did as well. But just some of the unique history here in the Union Cemetery. A number of the Lays would have been buried here as well. I believe it was a Michael Lay or a Christian Lay. They were the ones that built the Tulpehocken Manor, which is just west of Myerstown here. And they would have served directly with George Washington. So we are going to actually go down the road here, and then I will do a quick film as we're going down the road to go by that house that Christian Wilhelm Walborn would have built, and that would have been his plantation. Because of this being somebody's personal home now, I am not going to put my window down or anything like that. I'll give you guys a quick glimpse of the place. Christian Walborn would have served starting in 1782. So he served for the remainder of the war, as far as I'm aware. I believe he did have a little bit of a higher rank. So I will wind out getting a little bit more information for you guys at the end of this video. But this would have been built, this home would have been built by Christian Wilhelm Walborn. The 176 acres was passed on to his son Martin, who was his oldest son, and then most likely would have been passed on to Christian Walborn. Where it went from there, I don't know. It's actually family friends of ours. The guy, I knew him really well. His mom, her family are the ones that I believe own it now. So whether it's a continuation of the Walborn family or not, I have no idea. I'd have to look or ask about that, because this was sort of all just in the last 2 weeks or so. Sort of discovered this family history and got it the whole way back to the first family members that would have come over to the New World. So I'll give you guys a little bit more information on them, including some of the cool stuff, like they have a will that was down in Lancaster, which would have been where a lot of that stuff, because this would have been Lancaster County at that time. That home will be coming up here on the left. It is really just a stunning and beautiful home, and it also says to the age of it as well, and that is it right here. I'll show you guys this stunning home right there. That was my ancestor's home, along with his barn, and this would have been a massive plantation back in the day. And one of 4 that I know of. There's the Bachelor, when you go down towards Bear, the Bachelor plantation. You had the Topahawken Manor, which is right up here, which we will maybe, we got to go to that at some point. It's just hard to get in there. But that was the Lay family that owned that, and that's where they started the Union Canal, and George Washington had visited there at least 3 times. It's actually pretty cool history. And then you had the Isaac Meyer homestead, which was the 4th plantation. So there were a total of 4, and a lot of interesting history there. Just how they did things back then, and just these massive estates, really, that they had. So we will go more into the history here in a little bit and talk to you a little more about the history of the family. History is out there, my friends.